Okay, welcome everyone. I am delighted and excited to lead a discussion about women internationally, but not only women internationally, but women globally. I want to give props to Sherelle Carper, the national president of the National Association of Negro Business and Professional Women's Clubs, who's kept us out there around these issues. I want to say that I was pleased and privileged to be president of the club from 1995 to 1999, and that it was one of the most capstone experiences of my life. What I want to say about Sherelle is that she has a global perspective. And that's what we need to deal with is the global perspective. We know that women are denigrated all over the world, but we know that in this last pandemic year, we've taken our energy away from the world and focus it on ourselves. And now what we know and what we must know is that we have to be the voice that other people need, our sisters around the country, really around the world. We have to look at, global trafficking. We have to look at the way that women are treated in other parts of the world. And as an activist organization founded in 1935, we have to step up and step out in terms of what our leadership potential is. But we must think about the ways that patriarchy and oppression essentially diminish women. Female genital mutilation, sexual trafficking, and it's happening not across the globe, but right in Northern Virginia. This is something that is happening. Too many of us have been too silent around this. What I want to do is to ask that the spirits of the Lord join us with our chaplain of the day, Nicole Diaz, who will start us out with prayer.
Amen. Let us pray. Father, in the name of Jesus, Lord, we just thank you for this awesome and magnificent day that you have made. And we shall continue to rejoice and be glad in it. Father, we invite the presence of your Holy Spirit into the room, into the household, into the organizations that are watching. Breathe on this program, Holy Spirit, and cause there to be great enlightenment with the issues of female genital mutilation, with sex trafficking and child marriage, God. We know that these things grieve you. And so we ask, oh God, that as all hearts and minds are joined together and on one accord, that we vocalize our voices and we speak out against these things, and that we make impact through such power and sisterhood as gathered here together. We thank you, Father, for blessing Sister Angela and her organization. We thank you for blessing our Madam President, Sister Janet, and our Madam National President, Sherelle, and all of our sisters who are joined together for this cause. We thank you for our partners, God. We thank you for us, every sponsor, for every attendee, for everyone who showed any care or concern toward this program. We thank you, Father, and our desire is that your will be done. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, my sister, for such a powerful prayer and for such a powerful invocation. I want now to bring up our national president, not a national president, our local president, who has, with the partnership of the national president, put this amazing gathering together. Club President Janet Ford.
Good morning. Good morning. So on behalf of the Northern Virginia Business and Professional Women's Club, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out this Saturday morning to join us. As we have a discussion, this is a town hall discussion on the very, very important and very significant issues that are affecting women and children in our homes, in our communities, in our country and also globally around the world. We want to talk about these issues. We want to become aware. We want to know what is going on. Not only what is going on, but what can we do to help make a difference, one woman at a time, one child at a time, so that we can be strong for each other. Our theme is be the voice that they need. There are many times that their voices are not heard, and someone else has to speak up. Someone else has to stand up. Someone else has to say, enough is enough is enough. So this discussion that we will embark on today will allow us to become more aware, allow many to be informed, because there are things that you will hear that you're like, oh my God, I didn't know this was going on or that was going on. But you will now become aware that the things that you hear about are actually real and are actually happening. Some even right under your very nose. You will never know. Down the street, it could be your neighbor, it could be anywhere. And so we want to become aware. We want to become more cognizant about what is happening to our women, regardless of the race, regardless of nationality, regardless of whether you're rich or whether you're poor. It does not matter. We as women must realize that we are special, we are unique, we are valuable, and that we deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And we must learn to love each other and take care of each other. So this discussion is valuable, it's important, and I'm so honored to be a part of it. I want to thank my sister Angela for saying yes to the call. I appreciate her so incredibly much. And I want to thank our national president, Sheila T. Carper, for just being the spearhead and actually allowing us to have the freedom to do these type of programs. This is an awesome, awesome opportunity. And I want to thank all of the sisters of the Northern Virginia Business Professional Women's Club that we've come together to make a difference, not only in Northern Virginia, but globally. And that is what we are called to do. So thank you so much again. And I will now turn it over to our national president, Sister Sheila T. Carper.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Can you all hear me? I hope I'm not muted. But I want to thank to our president, Janet Ford, and I am the one who does all of the announcements in terms of protocol. So to our governor, Joe McIver, who I believe is on, and to our Mid-Atlantic Executive Board. We also have with us our national executive director of the National Association of Negro Business and Professional Women's Clubs, Incorporated. I also saw that our national vice president, Dr. LaTanya Conley, has joined us, and it is her that we have these programs. She is over our national programs, so we are hoping that Dr. Conley will be delighted in today's program that we're doing. To all of our local club presidents that are out there with us today, to our keynote speaker, U.S. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I don't know if she's here yet, but also to our Dr. Renee Murrell, who is our guest speaker. She has already introduced herself, but I just want to say again and acknowledge to our 18th past national president, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, who is also serving as our moderator. And we also, globally, we have with us the Minister of Women's Rights and Empowerment of Guinea. And I don't know if she's joining us, but we are delighted as we are doing this globally to have her join us. And to the members of my club, the Northern Virginia Business and Professional Women's Club, and to our distinguished guests who are out there who joined us today. On behalf of the Global International Affairs Committee and to the 15 partners in the Northern Virginia area, you will be introduced to these women, other organizations who are joining us today and who are sponsoring this program with us. It is my profound honor to welcome you to our virtue. This is our first virtue town hall, gender-based violence town hall meeting. How appropriate is the title of our town hall discussion? Vocalizers, women speaking out against child marriage, trafficking, and female genital mutilation. Be the voices they need. Sisters and brothers who have joined us, we no longer can be silent. It is our responsibility to come together as a coalition, as bold and powerful and resilient women, to raise our voices loud and clear, to protect our young women and girls from horrific acts of violence. These acts of violence are the faces of our daughters, of our granddaughters, and also as our boys and young men. So these modern day slavery acts can no longer be happening within our community. So as Congresswoman Lee has done and take her part with HR 6100, it is now our turn. Let us take her lead and move forward with supporting and doing whatever we need to do in our community to stop, I said stop these horrific acts that are taking place. So God bless you and thank you very much for joining us today and enjoy our program.
I am retired. I retired about a year ago. I was the victim specialist for the FBI in the Baltimore division. And I really wanted to start off about talking about human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. And it's so much to talk about. There's labor trafficking, sex trafficking, involuntary servitude, but we don't have the time. So I'm gonna just take a small piece of that. Domestic minor sex trafficking. Domestic meaning they are US citizens. So these are our babies. Minor meaning they are under the age of 18. So if you think it's not happening in the US, if you think it's not happening in Northern Virginia and all across this country, than it is. So I just wanted to share with you what my experience as the victim specialist was, and what I came in contact with while I was out there working in the streets. So I have a small video that we're going to show.
My father abused me. I've lived in 4 different foster homes. I don't even know how many men I've been with. I've been doing this since I was 14, and I'm tired. I don't like this. Is this all I'm good for? Do you even care who I am?
Just relax.
So I retired from the FBI as a victim specialist with 40 years of service to the FBI. My specialization is in human trafficking and mass casualty events. And it seems like we're having a lot of mass casualty events or active shooters lately. I have a master's degree in social work and a PhD in human services. So I was a dual role. In FBI, I was a part of law enforcement, but I was always the social worker in the department. So it was a great opportunity for us to look at a different side of it. And I appreciate that.
Excellent.
Next slide. So we want to talk about what is child sex trafficking. And it is a federal term for this, but I kind of simplified it because it can be somewhat confusing. Child sex trafficking is a form of child abuse that occurs when a child under the age of 18 is advertised, solicited, or exploited through a commercial sex act. And what we mean by a commercial sex act is the exchange of anything of value, such as money, drugs, or a place to stay for sexual activity. So it does not mean that they have to actually always be in exchange of money. So that is key, because when youth run away, sometimes it's just to survive or to have a place to stay that they may sell themselves. So words matter. And in Proverbs 18, we hear the tongue has the power of life or death, of the life of the, um, and this is powerful because the tongue and what we say to people matters. So there is no such thing as child prostitution, none. We need to take that whole jargon out of the vocabulary because this is child abuse. It's rape, it's exploitation. And the term that we commonly use today is child sex trafficking victims or survivors, or CST. And youth under the age of 18, they can't legally buy a car, a house, or anything. A credit card, they can't do any of those things. Why? Because we say that children don't have the ability to make those decisions. So they can't really participate in a commercial transaction. And if you are exchanging anything for goods, if you're exchanging sex for a place to stay or for money, the exchange of it makes it a commercial transaction. And children just can't consent to that. So there is no such thing as child prostitution. Commercial transactions can't happen between youth. So maybe sometimes people may say, oh, she has manipulative behavior, or she manipulates all the time. Well, if a child has been struggling at home and they had to leave their home because they weren't getting their needs met, or there was some abuse going on at home, and now this child is homeless in the streets, they have to learn how to survive. And manipulation may be their coping mechanism. And oftentimes, sometimes I've heard people say, oh, she's a runner, or she runs away. Well, that's just a behavior. It's not who she is, it or he. It's just a behavior. Now, the trafficker, or commonly known as the pimp, but most of the time, because that kind of has been glamorized. You have Pimp My Ride was a TV show, and Hustler and Flow. They was like the movie got an Oscar for having that. The song did. And so sometimes when people think about pimping, they see it as glamorizing, or making something to look beautiful. So, that term can be sometimes misleading. But a trafficker can be anyone who profits for the selling of children, including family members, foster care parents, gang members, or a romantic partner. And I say romantic partner because that is usually the manipulative behavior that I've seen, where someone will come at a young girl with a romantic interest. Oh, you're so beautiful, you so this, and then buy her stuff. And that's a grooming behavior. Buy her cell phone, get her hair done, nails done. And if you are living in poverty, that would be very attractive. Next slide. So what are you saying about those who are 18? And what is the difference between human trafficking and someone who could get arrested for prostitution? Well, above the age of 18, since we already know no one under the age of 18 is always going to be seen by state law and federal law in most states as a victim. Above the age of 18, we, meaning law enforcement, would have to prove that that person was fraud, force, or coercion. Fraud meaning that they came in thinking they were going to get employment, a job, a modeling career, rapping careers. These are some of the things that they are lured into the game. And when they got there, somebody said, oh no, you're going to have to do that. Or force, where somebody just said, I'm going to beat you and kick you, restrain you, starve you, or something's going to happen if you don't sell yourself. And coercion, where they may even threaten them a bodily harm, or someone in their family, or they may get them addicted to drugs, or in some cases, particularly with undocumented people, they may say, if you don't do this, then I'm going to have you deported, because I already know that vulnerability is the fact that they are undocumented. So that group is particularly vulnerable. And I just want to say about the 17-year-old, because we've been hearing a lot about a certain congressman who in Florida, you hear about him allegedly having a relationship with a 17-year-old. And why they're saying human trafficking is because he is allegedly taking this child out of state and giving her a lot of stuff in exchange for sex. And that's the perfect definition of human trafficking. The fact that she is under the age of 18 So this young person they allege is 17, and he is taking her. He doesn't have to take her, but the fact out of the state, but the fact that he is buying her stuff in exchange for sex makes it human trafficking. So if they're able to prove that, it is a federal charge. Next slide. So the facts, we want to know what the stats show. So the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, received more than 17,000 reports of child sex trafficking in all 50 states. So every state has this. And in 2020, there were 26,500 children reported missing. Now that in itself is startling, that we have children out there that are reported missing. But of those children that were reported missing, 1 in 6 were likely sex trafficking victims. 1 in 6. Women and girls are disproportionately affected by human trafficking, accounting for 71% of all victims. And children who are raised in the foster care program or child welfare have a greater chance of becoming victims. In 2013, 60% of children recovered by the FBI was in foster care. And you ask yourself, why is that happening? Well, we already know if this child was taken out of their home for something, some instability, neglect, abuse, or something. So that child is already vulnerable. Then you put them in a foster care program or an institution or great group home, and just not having that love and attention and the trauma that they've already suffered makes them particularly vulnerable too. So children are our most vulnerable population, and more than 300,000 youth are vulnerable. In 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice funded 45 service providers. That means there were people, organizations in the community ready to help this, and that was over $31 million ready to help these victims. But the Trump administration removed the funding for legal services for traffic victims and to get their criminal record expunged. Now, how valuable is it to get their criminal record expunged? Because if they're trafficking, if they were trafficked and they had to steal and use drugs, and then they were picked up for drug charges or theft charges or something else, but we were able to tie it to trafficking, then we wanted to expunge that record. Or if they were picked up for prostitution, if they were 18 or over, and before, even some children were picked up for prostitution. But if they were picked up, it is such a moral feeling to have a prostitution charge on your record. It tells the world about what you were doing, and then they make judgment. So it's been my experience that people would either rather have a drug charge or a shoplifting charge than have a charge of prostitution, because people begin to start to thinking poorly of you or give you that feeling that something is wrong with you. And also, the requirements for T visas changed under the Trump administration, whereas there was a foreign national, someone coming to the States, and they were trafficked in the United States. They could usually stay in the United States while the trial was going on or while we were gathering information, but they kind of did away with that. So we had to prove that ahead of time before they could stay in the States. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so this is my favorite part because this was where I came in. So the FBI agents, like I said, I'm a victim specialist and really not the agent, but the investigative team, the agents, the law enforcement team, all of them are doing an investigation. So they usually had an operation where these young people are posting online. I'm talking Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, even though they don't use Facebook. I think that's kind of the old school people are using Facebook. They use TikTok, Musically, all these other apparatuses. Well, they post on those. They post pictures and sell them, so advertise. And we, the FBI and law enforcement, are always monitoring that. So if we see someone who looks young, or we believe that they are young, based on the missing persons report that we've gotten, we will answer the call, or they will set up a date. And when they do an operation and they notice that they have a child under the age of 18, they would always call me. That is required. So I would come out of my home at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and I am the victim specialist. My role was different. I was not there to ask her what happened to, well, how'd you get here and all that. It was strictly designed to tend to that victim and to see how'd you get here? Or to ask her, how can I help her? Or to perform, or to at least try to talk to her about an alternative to the life. That night, I would absolutely recommend the Child Protective Services or CPS take charge of that child and put in an emergency shelter. Why? Because we don't really want to put our children in CPS hands. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can't find out all the information, and I really want to know, why is that child out in a hotel room or wherever we may have found her at 2 o'clock in the morning? And is the parent involved? Was she running? Why was she running? So we don't want to initially put her back in home, because it could have been the parents who were involved in this. And you need time to collect information. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, or at 3 o'clock or 12 o'clock, you just can't get it. So even if the parents are great parents, and I'm telling you, I've seen some great parents out there, because parents aren't always responsible for everything that their children do. So I've seen some great parents out there, but they need help. And what this does is brings it to the forefront so that we can give that family some help, because you can't keep people's children longer than a night before legally you can't. CPS can take them, but they have to have a hearing the next day with the judge, and they have to bring the parents to the table. So that's the perfect opportunity for me to kind of talk with the parents and find out what's been going on in your home, and can you keep this youth safe, and let me help you keep this youth state safe. Or if I call the parent up and they don't seem alarmed that the FBI has your child at night, because I'm always going to call them and say, look, we picked up your child. She's with the FBI. We're going to give her a good place to sleep, and we're going to see you in court tomorrow. Or CPS is also going to say that to them. And that parent doesn't get a little bit crazy, like, what? Where's my child? FBI? And that kind of thing. If they don't react like that, it's usually telling. If the parent doesn't just seem really like emotionally connected or something about that, it gives me the idea that, wow, did you know that this was happening? Were you involved in it? And so it just raises us to kind of dig deeper. Next slide. So these are some of the challenges when you have that. Is the youth is uncooperative. So I did not tell you that these youth who may be in love with the trafficker at the time, she doesn't want anything to do with law enforcement, and sometimes she's scared. So sometimes she's giving us incorrect information, wrong date of birth, wrong name, all kinds of stuff, and so it's very hard to get someone to talk who doesn't want to talk, or even to help when they don't. And even when I'm calling CPS, they may not be able to verify anything late in the night. And if we have an out-of-state youth who's coming from California or from somewhere else, and why they come to this area, Northern Virginia, Maryland, DC, is because of the 95 corridor runs all up and down. We also have a lot of casinos in the area with National Harbor, Maryland Live, and some of the other casinos that attract sometimes that. We have professional sports in this area, and all of these things tend to make people want to travel to the States. And what I've heard from young people who are involved in this is that in this area, the international airport is at BWI. They can get in and out really quickly, and this area, people will pay. In California, the buyers will try to barter with them. Oh, you ask $50, I'm gonna give you 20. But in here, if you ask $200, they will pay. We have the distinction of having some very high-end people here, and then we have very low-end people here. So you have a mixture of two economic statuses going down. So that means that people will often get into it because of poverty, but you will also have people who are willing to buy because they have the funds to. Next slide. And the challenges for the victim, and there are challenges for them when at recovery. Sometimes they're afraid, they're scared, they're angry because they've already been abused in the family, or some instability, been in childcare. They have fear. They can't trust you. They don't know you. They're in self-preservation mode. And so they don't know who to trust at that time. So they may not be as forthcoming about giving up information to help. Next slide. So the common shelter issues when we do put them in out of emergency shelter is that often the staff there really don't understand trafficking. Some therapists don't understand complex trauma, and they ill-equipped to handle this problem because it was kind of thrown into the child welfare system with very little training. We have virtually no resources for transgender and male victims. And these are only short-term um, options. And often because child welfare is usually about reunification of the family, they will probably go home. And we want to ask the question, why did they run away? And it's always, or almost always, a lot of times about money. And because those out of home placements, those conjugate care, it's very expensive to keep a child there. Next slide. We should be finished pretty soon with this. And we hopefully, this is the one scenario that I want to show because this was my girl from the Eastern Shore in Maryland. She was Kim. She was 15 years old. She ran away from home when she was 13. She had been living on the streets for 2 years. She was stripping in the clubs and prostituting in down on the block. And a 45-year-old man assisted her in her life. She believed that he looked out for her and he helped her when she needed help. And she says to us when we recovered her, where were you when I was abused by my mother's boyfriend? No one helped me then. And she had major attitude. No one helped me then. I've been supporting myself for years. And why would you put me back in the child welfare system that let me down? And what would you say to her? Because all of that is true. You know, what would you say? And usually if we had time, we would ask about that. But what you say is you acknowledge that it's true. Of course, we let her down, and we should say we're sorry for not protecting that baby. There's no way we should have let something like this happen. But we cannot say to her, and what I would never say to her is that it's going to be all right, or that that didn't happen, or that we can make it perfect. What I can say is that what I can do is offer my assistance to you now. And what I do know is that a 13-year-old who is still surviving, who was on the street from the Eastern Shore, came to Murrell and still living, this girl got some strengths and she has something in her that wants to live. And so that is the part that we have to really kind of wrap our arms around, the fact that she is a survivor at her core. She is. And that's what we need to build on. With a little help and some support, this girl could be dynamic. Next slide. And this was I just wanted to show this of the trafficker who burnt this child with an iron on her arm to try to control her. And so it is not glamorous out there. They have quotas to make. They're often just children out there who are acting like children and often not paying attention and being sassy and everything. Where at home you might punish them, the trafficker, he may beat or hurt them to get control. Next slide. And I think this is our video. What we need to do, we need to partner. We need to join with agencies like this agency. We need to get the word out. We need to have family, faith-based communities are so important. There is no other story but to sometimes offer them the story of salvation and how God is there to reach you anywhere. It gives them hope. Dysfunction in family, yes, they've had that. And so to hear the stories sometimes of how children can be saved and how anyone can be saved. It's so enlightening for them. So victims have to be involved. They have to buy into it. Thank you so much for hearing about what I did when I was with the FBI. Appreciate
Well, you
it.
did a great job, and we're grateful to you, and especially as a club sister, to have joined us to share this. I think that we always hear these terms, as you say, child prostitution, etc., but we really don't put the context to it. And so this is the context. Okay, so Casey wants to talk to us about forced child marriage. Casey Swegman, are you with us?
I am. Hi, thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to Dr. Murrell. Your presentation was incredible. And a huge thanks as ever to Angela Peabody for the invitation to participate in today's panel, and to Janet Ford for all your work in putting this together. It is really such a privilege to be here. And I am gonna share my screen and present a short PowerPoint on child marriage in the United States with a real focus on Virginia, because that is where I sit, that is where me and Angela collaborate. And I also want to recognize Morgan and thank Morgan for being here with us today and for being a partner walking with us in this work to end child marriage in the US. So I will share my screen and hopefully all will go smoothly. I'm also not a total Zoom whiz, but we'll all get through this together. Can you see the slideshow? Perfect. Okay. So as I said, I'm Casey Swegman. I'm with the Tahirih Justice Center. I manage the Forced Marriage Initiative at Tahirih. And I know that my former colleague, Jeannie Smoot, who is brilliant and my mentor, is also a participant today. Angela knows her well. I just want to shout out much of what's in this presentation is a result of her work. I will say that our headquarters office is in Falls Church. That is where pre-COVID I would normally sit. And so service provider in the Northern Virginia area, collaborating regularly with probably lots of folks on this call today. And the sort of bread and butter of what Tahirih has always done is free legal services for immigrant survivors of gender-based violence. And that includes survivors of human trafficking. So representing immigrant survivors of trafficking, trying to seek that T visa, as well as asylum, VAWA self-petitions for immigrant spouses of abusive US citizen spouses, and U visa cases for victims of crime in the United States. I will say that the program I manage is specifically focused on forced marriage, as it is impacting children and adults all across the United States. And so it's really important for anyone on the call today to walk away knowing that our immigration legal services are really quite site specific. Our attorneys serve immigrant survivors who need immigration legal support in Virginia and then up through DC into Baltimore, where we also have an office, in Houston, Texas, San Francisco, California, and in Atlanta, Georgia. But our Forced Marriage Initiative program serves women and girls, men and boys, and anyone on the gender spectrum facing the threat of forced marriage at any age all across the country, because it is such a unique program and there are so few resources for survivors and individuals at risk of this particular form of harm across the US. And so to sort of dive right in, I want to share the definition of forced marriage that the Tahirih Justice Center uses in our work and is most commonly accepted sort of globally and in the US. And that is that a forced marriage is one in which one or both parties do not or cannot consent to the marriage, and they typically involve elements of force, fraud, and coercion. And I'm grateful to Dr. Murrell for already walking us through what force, fraud, and coercion can look like. And I will share that it's very important for us to point out this distinction between forced marriage and arranged marriage. Tahirih does not see them as always equivalent, neither does the US State Department, and we recognize a world in which an arranged marriage can take place, where the family or the parents might take the lead on identifying a partner, but the ultimate choice of whether to marry, who to marry, and when to marry remains with the individual. So they can say no all along the way until the right person at the right time is found. And this graphic, which was created by Vidya Sri, who is herself a survivor of forced marriage and is a world-renowned advocate against gender-based violence and bringing communities from all over the world together to talk about these kinds of issues. And Darakshan Raja, who at the time was a researcher at the Urban Institute, they did a survey, and from the results of that survey, they created this spectrum that really helps folks to understand how, for an individual going through this, put yourself in their shoes. You're a child. Your parents, you've always understood, might play a role in your marriage process. And you are a junior in high school, and all of a sudden they start to suggest the need for marriage. For whatever reason, the timing starts to feel right. And, you know, you always thought that they would be involved, but you thought maybe you could finish college first before you get married. And over time, it starts to feel like no matter what you say, no matter what you do, your preferences don't really matter. You get told that you're now being difficult, that you're ruining the family reputation. And if you don't say yes to the next person they present to you, you know, you're not going to get married at all. And so for people in those instances where it's not so clearly forced, where it's not a single perpetrator, where it's not, you know, one day you weren't married and the next you were sold off into marriage, identifying what you're going through for yourself can be really difficult and gray. A service provider who's maybe not really familiar with naming what forced marriage looks like and seeing the red flags and spotting the signs can feel a little bit confused. And others in and around that person's life, their best friend, their teachers, their counselors, may really struggle to say what's happening, to name it, because it can be so nefarious, it can be so hard to define, especially when we're talking about the parents being the ones who are often pressuring and pushing in these instances. And so, you know, to the theme of today's presentation, I think the main question we still often get is this really happening in the United States? When I think of forced marriage, I think of places that are very far afield: Ethiopia, Iraq, Yemen, Guatemala. I don't imagine that this is happening in the United States. And the fact of the matter is, the US likes to think of itself as very exceptional. When we talk about global problems, we don't even see ourselves as part of that globe, but we very much are. And it's important to know that this is happening right in our own backyard and have your eyes open to that fact. And just very quickly, the survey that Tahre did now, Jeannie, if you can believe it, it's over 10 years old, identified as many as 3,000 known or suspected cases of forced marriage over just a 2-year period. And we had respondents from almost every single state participating. So that's really more proof. I know, Dr. Murrell, you don't need to be convinced, but this is really happening in the United States. And I think the other question then that comes following right after that is, well, who is impacted? And a lot of people, I think, might hold some stereotypes or, you know, some maybe, you know, well-intentioned but ill-informed beliefs around who is the face of forced marriage in the United States. And the fact is, it is happening across communities, religious backgrounds, and nobody is immune. Every single community is impacted by this. And survivors have come from 56 different countries of origin, and I have served in, including survivors who look and sound just like myself, from multi-generational American backgrounds, and some of the more outspoken survivors of child marriage in the United States who we owe a great debt to are Black women who have come forward to say that this has been happening in their community and really felt unseen and unheard at the time when they were being victimized, similar to all of the other clients that we serve. And they are often coming forward after the age of 18 because of all the ways in which as a child you are really ill-informed of your rights. You don't know what resources are out there. It's really hard to get help when you're younger. But I will say, even those folks who we are serving over the age of 18, the threat began prior to 18. And that abuse and that force and that coercion and that grooming began well before they became adults. And so why do forced marriages happen? And this is the other big question, like what parents would do this? Who would do this? Is this just human trafficking where minors are sort of scooped up by predators and forced into marriage as part and parcel of their trafficking trauma experience? And the answer is always incredibly complex case to case. We do have scenarios whereby one predatory adult, typically male, sort of targets one individual child. We see those cases in the news more often than not, but there are also cases where the family is very much involved in pressuring a young person to marry when they are not ready, when they do not want to. And in those moments, I think, you know, what we like about this graphic is that it names all of these communal and societal root causes that are present everywhere in the United States and everywhere across the globe. I would challenge anyone to find me a community where gender inequality, financial insecurity, poverty, patriarchal values and control over female sexuality weren't happening, weren't permeating all parts of society. And so when you have communities, let's say, or a family who really, really deeply, deeply believes in patriarchal values and custom and tradition of young women get married at this time at the behest of their parents to the person that their parents select, then we have a situation in which an individual who then in their like very specific life experience might be deemed as, you know, kind of stepping out of line. As someone mentioned, being told they're not ladylike, not following those gender norms that are really strictly prescribed in that community. And then the idea from the parents or the idea from the community is to say the only way to bring this person back in line as a woman, as a wife in this community, is to get her married. And that way we will teach her what it means to be a woman in this community. And then the family and the community take control over that process and force them into a marriage. There are also moments where pregnancy, unintended as it might be, as a teenager, is the impetus for a family saying the only way to quote unquote put a bow on this situation is for you to get married to the young man who got you pregnant. And because of the statistics we know about the rates of intimate partner violence, dating violence, domestic violence and stalking in those younger relationships, I can tell you that it is likely never in that minor's best interest to be forced into what we still call shotgun weddings. And we'll talk a lot more about those statistics later. And at times in certain communities, a sexual assault can actually be the impetus, the cause of a forced marriage, because in certain communities, the only way that the family sees or the religious leaders see to fix that situation is to marry the individual victim of the sexual assault, sometimes to her perpetrator, to protect them from prosecution. And so I could go on and on. There are a million ways in which all of these individual and community level factors can intersect in the United States to bring about a forced marriage, but that is probably a whole presentation for another day. But I hope that sort of gives a grounding into what these cases can look like. And so to dive sort of more specifically into the child marriage issue and really to drive home the fact that child marriage is happening in the United States, whether it surprises you or not, it's true. I will say that the Tahrir Justice Center does not equate child marriage with forced marriage in every single instance. I can imagine a world in which two very mature 17-year-olds who are in love consent to marrying each other. What I know, though, is that the majority of cases do not look like that. They are not Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo and Juliet didn't have a happy ever after either. And what we know is that young people can wait and should wait to marry for their own sake, which we'll get to later, but also for the sake of those who are not given the choice. When we pulled the data, you can see that the vast majority of cases involve girls marrying adult men. So this is a gendered problem. And pregnancy exceptions that allow very young minors to marry if they have proof of pregnancy or child are usually in direct conflict with statutory rape laws that would put the man who got them pregnant in jail, but for the marriage license. And parental consent exceptions really are just a veil for parental coercion when all you need is the signature of one or both parents to say, this is a good idea for my child. And in those instances, our clients have said, right here in Virginia, once the paperwork was handed over to the clerk, nobody asked me any questions. They assumed that because I had parental consent that I wanted to be married. And so I had no opportunity to ask for help. And those were the dynamics we were seeing prior to a really incredible legislative campaign that we ran in the state of Virginia, which kicked off the campaign to end child marriage in the US. And so I do want to share sort of the pre and the post. Pre-2016, there was just a big gap in knowledge. We didn't have this statistic of over 200,000 minors married in the United States between the year 2000 and 2015. So we're not talking about hundreds of years ago, we're talking about right now, today. And the highest absolute numbers at that time, Texas, Florida, Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, Virginia, where we sat, Illinois, and Missouri. I will say a lot of the states that you see listed there have made progress since then based on the tireless advocacy of folks like Morgan and others who have come forward as survivor advocates to say what happened to them and to convince folks to make progress. And so just a brief overview of all the types of challenges that minors in the United States face when they're facing the threat of forced marriage. You know, I think it's important to run through these because there still continues to be this exceptionalism that, okay, once I've convinced someone that child marriage is happening in the United States and sometimes it's forced, there's still this idea like, oh, the impact though can't be as bad as when a child gets married in some quote unquote third world country. But the fact of the matter, it is just as bad. The impact is real. We are not exceptional in that way either. And when minors face the threat of forced marriage in the United States, they have extremely limited rights because of all the ways in which the legal system does not allow them to advocate for themselves because of the presumption that that's what the parents will do. And so they honestly have a lack of knowledge of their rights. They have often a huge lack of evidence, lack of capacity to take a protection order in their own name. If they are married, they often lack capacity. Many attorneys are hesitant to contract with minors. So getting an attorney to represent you for your divorce is very difficult. So you can be married into a legal contract quite easily as a minor, but then it's incredibly difficult to get out of it. Honestly, in most states, Child Protective Services does not even see these cases as falling within their mandate. CPS has told us it's a family issue, a cultural issue. It's not in our definition of child abuse and neglect, and they don't intervene. They have an extremely limited ability to leave home, and runaway laws really mean that even if a parent is the abuser, is the perpetrator, they still have every right if that child runs away for their own safety, right? Dr. Murrell, you touched on this. When we've got a regularly running away child, we need to be asking questions. Why is that child running away? Children aren't delinquent for no reason. And so when parents use the law enforcement system to continuously return their runaway youth home, even when they themselves are the ones who are perpetrating the abuse, we need to have our flags up. We need to be able to spot these signs and these red flags and ask the right questions so we can intervene before the forced marriage happens. And then incredibly common for minors that we are working with, if they try and seek help and it is unsuccessful, systems deny them access to shelter or deny them access to protection order, whatever the case may be, and they are returned home and their parents are aware of the fact that they've tried to get help, we often never hear from that minor again. It can be very hard once a minor is sort of found out reaching out for help in these situations. If the parents are the perpetrators, or let's say they're returned to the benevolent adult who may in fact be a trafficker, who presents themselves as the caretaker of the child. Once that minor is returned, they are often put on quite a lockdown and really find it difficult to reach out for help again. So the risks of reaching out are really high, and they know that. And so you have to be really good at working with minors sensitively to reassure them that, you can get them the help that they need, and you really need to be able to do that. So more on the basic risks and harms of early marriage in the US, it's been really crucial for us to be able to point to US-based research. We're not talking about impacts of forced marriage from a study that was done overseas. This is all data and research that has taken place in the United States. When a minor gets married in the US, whether it's by choice or by force, they have higher dropout rates, they have increased medical and mental health problems over the course of their lifespan, they have a greater vulnerability to violence, a greater likelihood of future poverty, and there is up to 80% divorce rate when just one party to a marriage is under the age of 18. And divorce, again, sets up individuals, particularly young women, for instability, for poverty, especially if they've had children or multiple children in sequence after being forced to marry as a young girl.
Casey, you have been phenomenal. We're very grateful to you for your insight. This is an issue that, quite frankly, I was not especially aware of. And I think that many of us don't think of this as a huge issue. But what the National Association of Negro Business and Professional Women's Clubs does is looks at the issues that affect women and girls and deals with them. So we're grateful to you. I hope you'll hang on so that if people want to ask you questions through the chat, that you would be available. I would also, again, just thank you. I'm sure that our national president, Sheila Carper, is planning to take this to another level in terms of our national organization. This has just been done with our Northern Virginia group, where we know this has been an issue. But it's something that we as women need to deal with again and again and again. Yeah. Folks, I know we're all waiting for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and the team is working on getting her on. As we know, we live in the COVID age where everything is a little crazy. And so we just have to be patient. And I want to ask Natoschia Scruggs to join us now if she's here. Natoschia, are you here?
I am here. Thank you so much. You said that perfectly too. I have a lot of extra letters for no reason. All right. Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Natoschia Scruggs, and I want to talk to you about how female genital mutilation and cutting is a global issue. First of all, I want to say that anybody can be an ally. I am not a survivor. I'm a multi-generational Black American. So I descend from those people who started being trafficked in to the United States from Africa in 1619. But I did manage to gain some expertise in this area through different ways. I'm an assistant professor of global studies at Providence College in Rhode Island. I'm the national director of the US End FGMC network. I spent 5 years as the chief of the research unit at the US Mission to the United Nations, 3 years as an asylum officer and immigration officer at the US Department of Homeland Security, 2 years living in Egypt, working as a legal advisor to refugees, 1 year living in Cote d'Ivoire, working at the US Embassy in Abidjan, and I've traveled to 50 countries. And I say all that to say, again, it doesn't matter what background you're from, male or female, what gender, cultural background, you can be an ally. The only thing you have to commit yourself to doing is listening to and being respectful of survivors. What is FGMC? FGMC refers to all procedures involving partial or total removal of the female external genitalia and injury to the female genital organs for non-medical purposes. You'll hear people refer to it by different names. Some people say female circumcision, some say female genital cutting, khatna, sunat. Just realize that when you see someone refer to it as I will today with the C, that's meant to be inclusive of all forms of cutting. The World Health Organization classifies FGMC in 4 different categories. I will not go into them today, but I will tell you that the category depends on the extent of cutting that has taken place. You'll also hear people give many justifications as to why women and girls are subjected to this human rights violation, but there are 5 that really stand out. You'll hear people say, oh, it's to control sexuality, to keep her from being promiscuous. It's for marriageability, it's tradition, culture, it's cleanliness, or religion. And I wanted to just point out and emphasize, a lot of people erroneously believe that FGMC is tied to a particular religion. There is no religion that this practice comes from. It predates religion, organized religions. So overall, FGMC is practiced mainly, it's concentrated in West, East, Northeast Africa, but also in the Middle East, Asia, and beyond. Remember, my whole purpose for this presentation is to pinpoint and to let you know that this is a global practice, a global phenomenon. Per UNICEF 2020 figures, FGMC affects at least 200 million women and girls in 31 countries. But those statistics are flawed, and that's because they only include figures from countries where there's available data from large-scale representative surveys. And we know that there are many countries that don't have such information. So just because that information is not collected and available to us, it doesn't mean that it doesn't go on. We also know that with increased global migration, people are moving around. So it doesn't matter where you're from, people are moving to and fro. And as this happens, there's an increase in numbers of survivors moving about the world, and also those at risk who are moving about the world. Based on available evidence, there are women and girls living with FGMC or at risk, we know, in at least 92 countries. So again, there's a disparity between the countries that actually collect information and the countries where we know it's happening because women are telling us, women and girls are telling us. FGMC in the United States, this is interesting because even I didn't know this. FGMC was a routine medical practice for most of the 19th and 20th century in the United States, right here where we're from. And it was used to prevent or treat, believed it could prevent or treat lesbianism, masturbation, depression, nymphomania, a whole host of different categories of behaviors that people thought if you cut these women, it would stop. And it was covered, the procedure was actually covered by insurance companies up until 1977. That was very shocking for me to know. There have been recent non-medical incidences that have been reported in the United States from women who belong to white Christian communities. Per CDC, Centers for Disease Control data from 2016, there are an estimated 500,000 women and girls in the United States who've either undergone FGMC or who are at risk. Again, this data is problematic, it's incomplete, because it only examines certain immigrant communities, and it bases their prevalence, it projects prevalence rates from the countries that they've come from onto the groups. That's not necessarily accurate. Also, it uses indirect techniques, and it also doesn't account for factors that happen between people leaving where they're from and the places where they migrate. In the United States, and I won't go into detail in the interest of time, but we have a history of legislation against FGMC. The first law that criminalized FGMC was in 1996, but we have a very strange history of back and forth, where we actually our federal government, our Justice Department did not uphold the federal law. I won't go into great detail because we actually are honored to have Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee here today, who's one of my heroes, because she sponsored HR 61, the Stop FGM Act 2020. So I won't go into detail. I'm sure she will cover it. We see some trends in the United States, some improvement, but still we face some challenges. First thing is there's much more awareness now. People realize, people are being taught in school. I teach in my classes, for example, that FGMC is gender-based violence. It's a form of child abuse. It's a human rights violation. It causes lifelong mental and physical effects that these women and girls struggle with. And this also affects, I love, someone pointed out, I think it was Ms. Malveaux, that it's not just because it happens to women and girls, it doesn't mean it doesn't affect the men and the boys in their lives as well, because it does. There's increased government support. Again, the HR 6100 Stop FGM Act of 2020 was passed just in January 2021. And what it does is increases the criminal penalty for performing FGMC on a minor. It expands the scope of punishable offenses, and it continues to ban the transport of a minor outside of the United States to have FGMC done. So if you knowingly transport a child out, oh, she's just gonna go visit her grandparents in such place, or her aunt and uncle in such place, but you're really doing it to have that child cut, you can be prosecuted. There's also increased collaborations, much more research being funded by the government entities, private foundations, advocacy networks like my own, the US End FGMC network, that is comprised of over 400 individuals and organizations coming together to fight these issues and raise awareness, and most of all, push for legislation to protect women, girls, and non-binary people. There are also more survivors leading efforts, and more communities speaking out, speaking for themselves. The challenges that we still face, again, as much as you say it's not tied to any one religion or any one group or region, people still have that tendency to do it. And they'll say, oh, you know, this comes from Muslims, or this is tied to Islam. It is not. This is not from Islam. There may be many people who happen to be Muslim who practice it, but it does not come from Islam. But it doesn't stop people from engaging in Islamophobia. Also, it doesn't stop people from being anti-immigrant. Oh, you see, it's all these people coming from over there, coming here, and they bring it to us. We know that's not true because, as I said, it was performed in the United States, and we have proof of that, women coming forward saying that they underwent it. Another challenge that we have is limited access to funding and capacity building for community-based organizations. We know, I think Dr. Murrell pointed out, there's just a lack of funding. We never have enough money for these initiatives. So if you want to learn more, how can you help? How can you become an ally? My network, the US End FGMC network, is a member of something called the Global Platform for Action Against FGMC. There are a bunch of us, regional organizations for Asia, Africa, all over, you name it, we're there. If you go to the website, and I'll make sure that you have the links in the chat, you can find out more about us. You can also download a report that we put together with a couple of other NGOs, Equality Now, and the European counterpart to the US End FGMC network. We put together a report in March 2020 that sheds light on all the things that I'm telling you and goes into greater detail and doesn't go as fast as I'm going right now. And thank you for the time and for inviting me today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us. So we have, I think, 3 other speakers, but we have like the icing on the cake is what I'm going to call Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Congresswoman of the 18th Congressional District of Texas. She is amazing. We know her in this circle about her work around Black women and oppression, female genital mutilation, and other things. But I know her better as my colleague with HR 40 and reparations. And she has given us the best leadership that John Conyers could have left us with, because he asked his NARC, and NARC is the National African American Reparations Commission. He said, I want Sheila to take this on. And she has. But Sheila Jackson Lee, the female genital FGM Vacation Cutting Bill 2013, so many House committees, honored as the Global Woman Peace Foundation, just an amazing grace. Sheila, we are talking about all this stuff that happens to women that we have moved away from at some level because we've been so internally focused. Give it to us.
Dr. Melville, let's see, am I on? Yes. Yes. You can see that I am in a moving vehicle, which is the plight of those of us, members of Congress and others that are very much in love with all that you do. And certainly if I am called by Dr. Julianne Melville, I am not only standing tall, but I am moving in that direction. And I am doing that, but as I do so, I am rushing away from my vaccination site that I opened up. I've just changed in the car because I'm headed to the homegoing ceremony where I will be speaking. So please forgive me for moving with expeditious speed, but I cannot tell you how powerful a session this is for the Global International Affairs Committee of the Northern Virginia Business and Professional Women's Club on the female genital mutilation, child marriage, and human trafficking, all of which I have worked on extensively. Let me say that human trafficking and sex trafficking is alive and well in America. As the federal authorities will tell you on sex trafficking, it is really the sex trafficking and human trafficking is really the crime of choice, because unlike drugs, you can use the victim over and over and over again. Yes, FGM is in the United States, and through some untoward decision, court decision, the law was not universally applied. It was not provided federally where federal authorities could enforce it. So let me quickly say that I worked, punched, moved, and cajoled as I authored and introduced HR 6100, the Stop FGM Act of 2020, and greatly appreciative that in a bipartisan manner that the Congress moved swiftly to that legislation to improve the lives of the people we represent. On January 5th, 2021, the Stop FGM Act of 2020 was signed into law. This legislation was necessary, remedial legislation modifying current law to aid women in several important aspects. So it does this: anyone who performs, attempts to perform, or conspires to perform female genital mutilation, no matter what the question is, on a minor, whether you're saying it's because of homosexuality or whatever ailment you think that you want to hurt a woman on, then it is not acceptable. It prohibits a parent, guardian, or caretaker of a minor who facilitates or consents to the female genital mutilation of the minor, and anyone who transports a minor for the purpose of performance of female genital mutilation on the minor is criminalized. Their actions are criminalized. Increase the mandatory maximum for violation of 5 years to 10 years. In addition, prohibited defendants charged with this offense from using as a defense the argument that they were compelled to commit the offense because of religion, custom, tradition, ritual, or standard practice, and also amends the statute to more explicitly define what types of procedures constitute female genital mutilation, so we can't cover it up. And most significantly, the Stop FGM Act enables us to better address FGM more comprehensively in the United States by requiring the Attorney General, in consultation with other federal agencies, to submit an annual report to Congress to include the number of women and girls in the United States at risk of FGM, the protections available and actions taken, and the education and assistance provided to communities. Communities about FGM. So according to the World Health Organization, there are no positive health benefits from practice of FGM, and the procedure can have severe long-term impacts on the physical, psychological, sexual, and reproductive health of girls and women. So I'm excited. Forgive me, I'm driving and had to say turn here, but I'm delighted to be with you all. I'm now getting out. If you're still going on when I come back in, I'll be happy to join you. But I'm delighted that you are focused on something that most would not think that we would be able to focus on. So thank you so very much for having me today.
Sheila, we're always grateful for your brilliance and for your wisdom. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your leadership. That's what we're most grateful to for you, is your leadership that has been stunning, just absolutely stunning since you've been in the Congress.
Amen.
We have been so blessed today to have this sister share her time and energy with us and all the others who have gone before. I'm just looking at just everyone who's spoken. So Angela, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I had to unmute myself. Thank you, Dr. Marvel. We will now hear from Morgan Meadows, who is a survivor of both forced child marriage as well as trafficking.
So I'm very happy that you have joined in to listen to the experts that have joined us today. I am a survivor, as was mentioned. I am an educator. That's where my life of restoration has led me. And I was trafficked for 20 years. It included pornography starting at the age of 3. I have been experimented on. I have burns on my body from cigarettes from my childhood trauma. I have also been was in an arranged marriage that turned into a forced marriage before I was 17 years old. I was actually married at 17, and I was married in Front Royal, Virginia, a very beautiful place. But my life continued from being trafficked in my family to being trafficked by my first husband. He was someone who was 10 years older than I, who had a background, who had even been in prison, and that was what my parents partnered me with. My mother was a child bride. Her sister was a child bride, both at the age of 16. And I've actually done genealogy on my family and discovered that I'm a direct descendant of Mary Chilton Winslow, the first female to have stepped off at Plymouth Rock, according to the legend. And she was married as a child bride herself because she inherited her parents' property when they died a month after arrival. She was 13 years old, and then she went on at the age of 16 to marry a Winslow, who was the brother of the governor. And then my family descended from there. So as I've learned, there are more child brides in my genealogy than there are adult brides. That's just something I've been learning in the last year. But in my research, if you could advance the slide. So I decided to focus, since my experience included religious cult experiences. This slide is just to show that I went through the Bible just for every reference of marriage, marry, and married. And there are 176 of those. And the 35 of them, the categories are listed, and then the consequences of those teachings. Well, obviously the genealogies are neutral, but if you go to the prohibits intermarriage, in other words, taking of foreign wives, this was 27 times, and the punishment was curses or even becoming a plunder of war. And okay, then the forced alliances, which even included, there's 20 of those in the Bible that include tax exemptions for forced alliances, not just between kings marrying for the sake of getting more land for another kingdom, but actually those were arrangements that were required. There are 18 detailed prohibitions regarding incest or something similar, and there are 9 instances of slavery in which a bride price was attached, and those included being trafficked by a father to someone else. And then 3 instances of rape related to getting married to the person who was raped. Now, I'm still doing research on all the instances of wives, but if you could advance the slide. I'm pointing to this because we don't always realize how far back we have to go to understand cultural influences on why there is a persistence in child marriage. And for me, the relationship of human trafficking to child marriage is their one link. And I'm finding as I get to know other survivors that this is a much more common scenario than we have been led to understand. I'm pointing now to the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance. It is a program that is sponsoring shelters for survivors of trafficking to have appropriate restoration for as long as they need to, anywhere from 18 months to several years. So this is the agency. They are in communication throughout the United States. And if we could advance the slide, their mission is to do the Alliance referral system. And this is what they have accomplished in 2 years' time. There have been 500 references to their agency from 35 different states. And this is of survivors. The average age of women seeking help is 31. However, many shelters, residential programs are for minors or for 20-something women. So that's just interesting for us to note in making adjustments to our systems in the future. And these also 94% of all of the recipients and referrals were US citizens. And that also includes 94% were women. 4% were male, 2% transgendered. So the Alliance referral system has 125 referral agencies that, and they accept more. These referral agencies, it's important to note that 50% of their referral agencies are agencies, organizations, and safe houses that deal directly with survivors. 40% are social workers or case managers, 5% are self-referrals, and only 2% is law enforcement or the court system. So one of my roles as an educator working on my doctoral dissertation for the resiliency of survivors is I'm looking at, if we could advance the slide, the ways in which we are educating or failing to educate. For example, the national, let's see, the National Criminal Justice Training Center, which is in Fox Valley, Wisconsin, which is close to where I was for a couple of years, they just put out their 2020 statistics for child abuse. And they're difficult to see, but not one reference is made to child marriage. And yet 6% of registered marriages, that's the average, are with minors in the United States. So my prevention education is focusing on truth and reconciliation programs where you not only have trauma-informed communities, but you have communities informed on the history in America of child marriage and why it's persisted, as well as the economic elements of human trafficking and child marriage. So focusing our societal change, so systemic societal change is going to be very important, but emphasizing strength-based empathic learning and relationships so that we understand the patterns within our cultural lives that continue to keep these things in place. And it's iterative. In other words, as these systemic changes go forward, we need to build on what we know and not get stuck in talking about how horrible it is that it's still happening. We must make the behavioral change happen. And I want to refer the participants to the work of Dr. Stephen Hassan, who works with cults. He works with survivors of cults and educates about cults. And he has family-based intergenerational education provided that helps people understand why you can have multi-generational trauma and people not even recognize it. And the other piece of that is that he has a model called the BITE model, which is used in trafficking, which is used in coercing marriages, which is used in cults, which is behavior is controlled, that's the B. Information is controlled against the victim, that is the I. The T in the BITE is thought is controlled, and the E in BITE is emotion is controlled. All of those elements are in every single survivor of forced child marriage and human trafficking, whether it's labor trafficking or it's sex trafficking. I myself do not limit my work to sex trafficking. I'm interested in accrediting, helping agencies get accredited who are serving survivors by listening to what survivors are saying that they need. And my reference to the Alliance, the Sheltered Alliance for Trafficking Victims, is because they are gathering information and putting out a report. They put out their second one just this year. It's worth reading and learning what we can do, what you as participants who've maybe never known a person who's been trafficked, what can you do to help your community learn how to step up and make legislative change and local community change, and even change in prevention education, so that our children are not growing up without voices to speak to what might actually prevent them from becoming part of a lifetime of trauma that takes a lifetime to recover from. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this.
Morgan, thank you so much for sharing your story and also for your research. Your research is very impressive. I think that we don't look at the research, we look at the stories, and the two have to come together. So we appreciate you. We're very grateful to you for joining us today. We have Dr. Wallicia Gill. She is to talk to us about human trafficking. And we are grateful again to her for spending this time on her Saturday with us.
I began to learn about human trafficking after retiring from public school education. I spent almost 40 years as a public school teacher, principal, and also worked at the university level. But in my retirement, I've continued to work in my community. And one of the clubs that I've been involved with is my local Rotary Club. And there was a speaker there talking about human sex trafficking of children. And my eyes were certainly open because, like so many people, I thought it happened elsewhere. And so I've made it my business to learn as much as I can and then to share what I've learned. And so I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to do just that, to share. And so I'm going to begin my presentation with sharing with you information about what is happening specifically in Fairfax County and Northern Virginia, because I think people, again, think, oh, gee, that's not happening here. It can't be happening here. And then after the short video, I'm going to share a story that I wrote about for a newsletter for local Democrats. And I will share that story, and then I will provide some resources, because I hope that those of you who have tuned in will continue to educate yourselves, because that is going to be the best way and the most effective way that we can address this problem. So let's hope that my technology works, and it looks like we might be in business here.
Blue Heart campaign and is a symbol to combat human trafficking. The blue is meant to symbolize compassion for victims. My area of Virginia is called Fairfax County, and it's right outside of Washington, D.C. And as you may imagine, with its proximity to the government, it's an area that can tend to be rather self-important, boasting that it's the home of the CIA, that it has an even higher concentration of high-tech workers than Silicon Valley, and that it has the second highest median income in the United States after its next door neighbor, Loudoun County. What it also has is a huge problem with child and teen sex trafficking. It's reportedly the 5th largest hub for that in the entire United States.
I'm not done.
For clarity's sake, let's make sure that we're operating on the same definition of child and teen sex trafficking. It involves using force, coercion, or fraud to involve a minor in sexual acts. These sexual acts result in either money being exchanged or the commercial benefit of the perpetrator. While most often people think of a prostitution type situation, it can also involve remote interactive sexual acts performed over the internet, for example, personal sexual servitude, or pornography. How big of a problem is it? Well, it's a huge problem. In the United States, it's the fastest growing organized crime activity. And Virginia is one of 10 states that makes the most calls to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline. A lot of those come from Northern Virginia. Gangs are apparently turning more and more to human trafficking because, unlike guns or drugs, which can only be sold once, services from a human being can be sold over and over. The internet and the lack of controls on it are also considered a big part of the problem. Traffickers can disseminate the materials quickly, find a target audience quickly, and also have the chance to groom victims online through relationship building. It's definitely an under-recognized problem. Counselors, educators, healthcare.
I stopped the video because, again, what I wanted to communicate to you is that there is indeed a huge problem here in Fairfax County and Northern Virginia. And I think Ms. Bokamp's information, which is research-based, speaks to that. Just recently, and I'm going to share a couple of examples that will speak to what was being presented in that video. In November, an attorney, Alexandria, there was a criminal complaint charging this attorney, Matthew Araskin, with trafficking 6 minor girls from 3 different high schools in Fairfax County. This went on from June 17th through September 19th. He would pay these girls $500 to $800 per sexual encounter. He gave the girls expensive gifts, purses from Tiffany, a $7,000 camera. He promised them that he would fly them to places in his plane, in his private plane. He provided these girls with alcohol, marijuana, and shrooms. And he met these victims on Sugar Daddy, Sugar Baby website called seekingarrangement.com and the dating website Tinder. And he would use Uber to transport these girls to his apartment in Clarendon for his commercial sex acts. Then, as I said, as I mentioned earlier, I'm thankful that he's been found and that he's being investigated by the police and the FBI. And then I shared with you that I had written, or Angela may have shared, that I'd written some articles about sex trafficking in the Northern Virginia area. I had the opportunity to interview a mother whose daughter was trafficked. This was a 14-year-old young lady who was trafficked for a period of about 9 months. And so I'm going to share a bit of this with you because I think it's compelling. It is compelling, and it certainly speaks to what I think some of us know, but many of us are beginning to learn. I interviewed the mother whose daughter was a trafficking victim. Here is the story, and I've changed the names. The nightmare began as Sophie was about to begin her freshman year at a Fairfax County high school. Sophie was outgoing, had a bubbly personality, plenty of friends, good grades, and she had a harmonious relationship with her family. Sophie had gone to the local mall in the summer before freshman year, and she formed a friendship with a young man. The family noticed that she was spending a lot of time with him and communicating with him via social media and texting. The family thought this was just a friendship and nothing serious. The fact is, this boy was a member of a local gang, and he had scouted Sophie, and he had begun to manipulate her, treat her very, very well. And then He sprang the trap on her. After school, Sophie was lured to an area outside of the school, probably remote, and 5 men gang raped this young woman. And while she was being gang raped, they videotaped this and used that as a way to keep her in line, because if she told or if she stepped out of line, they would expose her. They would put this on the school media, the internet. At any rate, this girl became a trafficking victim. They gave her a phone so that they could keep track of her. They used drugs as another way to control her. They watched the family's home. When the family was away from home, they would threaten the siblings, and they did all kinds of horrible things to this family. At any rate, she was kidnapped twice. She was rescued once and then kidnapped again. And luckily, she was found by a police officer associated with a gang unit and found in just the nick of time, because they were planning to sell this young woman for $2,000 to another group in another state. So this is vile. The picture is not pretty. Luckily, she was rescued. Only 1% of victims are rescued, according to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. 1%. Every 30 seconds, a child is being trafficked. To get back to Sophie's story, the family had to move away. They had to move away and live in hiding. And it took Sophie over 3 years of counseling and therapy before she could begin to be returned to the family. To this day, needless to say, that family remained deeply scarred. So there is the, I guess, down and dirty and ugly of what this means and what this means for our families. So what can you do? What can we do? Well, I think we can do the kinds of things that we're doing. We can educate ourselves. We can continue to learn about this horrible practice that's going on in our community. And I provided some resources, which I will certainly make available. For example, TED Talk is an excellent place where you can find valuable and worthwhile information. YouTube is also a wonderful resource to learn more about this horrible practice. And I hope that I have kept this tight enough, Dr. Malveaux. I will end my presentation here.
From you, this has been so compelling, especially the last story that you shared. I think we've all learned so much today about all the things that we've been not paying enough attention to. And I want to again shout out both Angela and Sherelle for lifting us up. Our last discussant, and I want to thank her for her absolute patience and ask Angela to help me out. But F.A. Cole is a survivor of female genital mutilation. And so we want to hear from her. And Angela, would you give her a more thorough introduction?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Malveaux. It's my pleasure to introduce this person. F.A. Cole is like a daughter to me. She is not like a daughter, but she is my adopted daughter, and she is the survivor of female genital mutilation who has really made her voice heard. F.A., please take it away and share your story. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you. My name is F.A. Cole. I don't have any slides to share because I've done this, I don't know how many times, but I'm glad to be here. I am originally from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I'm not sure how many of you are actually familiar with that. And I was born, well, to Catholic parents. So I'm not Muslim. When people hear about FGM, they automatically think that it's a Muslim thing, but it is not a Muslim thing. And so how did it happen? My mom, who's Creole, I don't know if you can see me, but my mom, who's Creole, she did not undergo female genital mutilation. It was actually my stepmother. And I was 11 years of age when that happened. That was 36 years ago, because I'm 47 and I'll be 48 in a few months. But she manipulated my dad and told him to tell me and my older sister at the time that this is a good way for us to become women. But the funny part of it all is that she never touched her own daughter. Because she knew the implications of female genital mutilation, where I come from, they call it female circumcision, but it's not circumcision because I do not have a penis. Also, I get graphic when I share my story. I do not have a penis. God created me female, so there's no foreskin there. When they mutilate girls, they amputate. It depends on the type. I actually underwent type 2, but I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was type 1. But my vagina was so brutally massacred that it doesn't just only affect the survivors sexually, it affects us psychologically, it affects us physically. I don't know if you can see me when I talk. I tend to close my eyes because I still get panic attacks. This happened on August 1st, 1984, and today is April 10th, 2021, and it just happened to me a few seconds ago. So when I feel the panic attacks coming, I tend to close my eyes. And so how did it happen? We went to this place. It was in the evening. My stepmother, they took us to this place. It's usually in the bushes where it happened. And we were greeted by strange women that I had never met. The only people there I knew were my stepmother, and I think her mother was there. And so they told us to get undressed because, of course, they knew what they were doing. So we got to get undressed and we sat under the tree. All of these places, they always have this massive tree. And just so you know, it's also a highly demonic practice. Usually when people talk about FGM, they don't talk about the demonic aspect of it. It's highly demonic, and I was tortured, not just physically or emotionally, but spiritually in my dreams every night. I was given as a bride to a demon, because they usually look for one of the girls who has a brighter future, and then they give that to the demon, but that's another topic. So we were told to undress. They took my sister first because she was the oldest, and then they came to get me. But when they came, they had to blindfold me first, and then they tied my hands behind my back. So if this was such a good thing, why would you blindfold me? Because one, they didn't want me to know who was going to do the cutting. So they led me to what I call the bed of death. And I believe it was 2 women on each side of my legs. They put me down on the ground and they spread my legs wide open and they pinned me down. And so the cutter, she sat on top of me. She was also naked. How did I know that? I'll get to that. But they used the same razor that they had used on my sister. And that's also something to keep in mind. So if one girl has HIV, everybody gets it. If one girl has hepatitis, everybody gets it because they use the same tool. So as she began to cut, I began to, because nobody told us what was going to happen. They don't tell you. But after that, they tell you that, or if you talk about it, you'll die. Your stomach will swell and you'll die. And I thought it was just in my country. But when I started to talk to other survivors, I realized it's a universal lie. They tell all these girls that if you tell anybody who has not undergone FGM about what happened, you will die. So as she began to cut my clitoris, the pain, the pain was so much. I started to scream and they started to wriggle on her. And the more you scream, the louder they get because they were singing. They had been drinking. They were singing. And so I pulled myself forward and I beat her bum. And that's how I know she was naked. And thereafter, I was gagged to suppress my screams and to stop me from not doing that. And then afterwards, I got up and they led me to sit under the tree and I was covered in blood. And that's where the phobia, I believe, came from. I can't see blood. It just doesn't. Anyway, so after that, you never actually heal from female genital mutilation. You do not. The scars may heal, but you never heal. When I was created by God, I was created whole and complete. And that day, August 1st, 1984, they took away something from me that left me incomplete. Yes, I was whole as a human being, but I was incomplete. What other women have, I do not have. Sexually, they tell you that you're going through this so that it can curb sexuality. No, it actually did the opposite. I kept going from one man to the other, looking for satisfaction. I didn't know that it was because of FGM. And so fast forward, I met Miss Angela Peabody and the Global Women Peace Foundation. Because of time, I'm going to skip a lot. In 2017, September, I actually underwent clitoral restorative surgery, and I call it my new toy. I have been reunited with my clitoris. And what I found out when I went for the surgery was that I thought it was type 1 that was done to me, where they removed the clitoris and the hood. But my doctor told me that it was actually type 2. They amputated my clitoris. They removed the labia minora. And then because the woman was so drunk, she just left something hanging there. But my doctor fixed all of that. I am also a survivor of rape, but not a day goes by that I'm not reminded of August 1st, 1984. Why? Because whenever I shower, I touch myself, it tells me that something happened there. And I usually do videos with my husband, who's not from the continent of Africa. And I'm the first person that he had ever even heard about FGM was when he met me. We did a video one time, and he said that somebody asked him about how is it like being married to somebody who underwent FGM? And he said, oh, that's personal. But I asked him, and he said, there's something you always say when we're about to be intimate is that, please don't hurt me. And then it's just something that comes out, but I never knew the impact it had on him. It's just something that comes up because penetration is always painful. So my first thing is, please don't hurt me. And I didn't know how it affected him. I am in therapy right now. Yeah, I do all these talks, but I don't think I will ever go back to before FGM happened to me. But I'm grateful to Global Women because now I have a sensation that most women do not have. There are over 200 million women and girls who've been affected by FGM. And most of them may not even have access to the surgery. And I am a big advocate of the surgery. I mentor survivors of FGM. I'm not ashamed to share my story. And if you want to know more, I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. It's called Distant Sunrise, The Strength in Her Pain to Forgive. Make sure you get it from Amazon because there's something going on. I think a bookstore is selling my book. I'm not sure why. It's $13 on Amazon. And if you also look me up on YouTube, F.A. Cole, you'll see all of the videos I've done about my restorative surgery. Because of the restorative surgery now, I feel more confident. I feel like I am a woman again, even though it's not the way it was when God created me. But I just want you, the next time you enjoying intimacy with whomever your partner is, just know that there are 200 plus million women and girls out there who may never experience sex the way God intended for us to experience sex as women. Thank you.
Oh, my sister. Oh, my sister. Thank you for being so transparent, so personal. I mean, I'm sitting here just like clutching my chest, thinking about the pain that you went through and the brutality, because it is absolute brutality that you experienced. But I think we needed to hear that because this really immobilizes us to think about the ways that we want to fight against the oppression of women. I mean, this is the oppression of women. And, I always tell people racism, sexism, and patriarchy are baked in the cake we call America. It's just there. And but it's not just America, it's everywhere. So I personally just want to say I am so sorry, but I'm also so grateful that you put a face and a voice to this. So I want to thank Morgan and Wallicia and of course, FA and the others. Oh, gosh, for your riveting testimony. But I'm going to ask Angela to close us out.
I just want to say on behalf of the Global Affairs Committee of Northern Virginia Business and Professional Women's Club, thank everyone for taking the time out of your Saturday schedule to join us this afternoon. And even though she's gone from us, but thanks to the Congresswoman, Sheila Jackson-Lee, for joining us. Thanks to our guest speaker, Dr. Murrell, our 5 panelists, Casey Swegman, Natoschia, Scruggs, Wallicia, Gill, Morgan Meadows, and Effie. Our moderator, of course, Dr. Malvo, who held the program together. Thank you. We thank our president, Janet Ford, for her support. She provided this committee in planning, in the planning of today's event. This club has several committees, I want to say, but I would not trade my committee for any other. I thank my co-chair, Sherelle Copper, Deborah Jackson, Bobby Jane DeHaven, Brenda Nicholson, Nicole Diaz, and Kimberly Tsumbu. Without these ladies, today would not have been possible. Those are my, are the members of my committee that put this thing together today. And last but not least, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our partner organizations. I beg your attention for a few more minutes while I acknowledge each of today's partners. Jesu Kwate of Inter-African Committee USA, Maida Piggy of Jack and Jill of America Nova Chapter, Megan Caesar of Youth for Tomorrow, Princess Powell McEverly of New Dominion section of NCNW, Helene Fisher of Nova NCNW Incorporated, Janine Payne and Cheryl Thompson of Institute for Advancement of Women's Health, Courtney Nusso of the Rotary Club of McLean, Vera Blake of Sisters United in Service, Maddie Palmore of Domestic Violence Platform, Darla Sly and Letitia White of Alpha Kappa Alpha Psi Rho Omega, Wallicia Gill of Rotary Club of Centerville and Chantilly, Danielle White and Annette Brown of Dynamic Divas of Virginia, Alicia Jones McLeod of Challenging Racism, Sheila Coates of Black Women United, and my organization, Global Woman Peace Foundation. Thank you, everyone. You know, we hope we get together again in the future. We have, these are conversations that have to be continued. Thank you. And thank you again, Dr. Malvo.